Computer in 3, 2, 1. David Cam, hello and good morning. How's it going?
Good morning to you too. It's going great. I just feel quite grounded upon just waking up to this new day. So ready to go.
Great. And Dave, what have you been up to since lockdown? For almost
Yeah.
since I haven't actually been able to keep up with everyone. I think it's one of those things that
Mm.
if you're doing a lot of stuff, you don't. I'm actually watching Instagram less than ever before because,
hmm
like, once once I'm done teaching, I'm like, all right, I can do something else for a while.
Yeah. I went completely off grid for the first 2 months, I think.
Wow.
Um, yeah, just I don't know. I felt like this was intuitively it felt like a call for us all to tune inwards. So I wanted to take that opportunity to do that, because when would you actually be in one place for such a long time? It's almost as if um, a retreat made necessary for everyone to experience. So yeah, it was quite scary going into it, but then I thought it was needed to basically take 2 months off work. I didn't do much socializing at all as well. It really was me in this little bubble of my home and my partner and his family, and that, and even just with that, it started with days that seem like forever, but then things come up, because I feel the body finally is able to breathe a little bit. There's a bit of space in the structure of your routine and just your physical self. And then you start catching up with, things that you may be um, not giving the time towards, So for me, it would be lots of, unprocessed uh, emotions, like not necessarily bad only, also good stuff. Um, and lots of journaling and lots of nature, which I feel like I share about so much as a teacher, but I'm not actually able to do it myself. And so it was a lot of walks in the park and just off screen times. So that was pretty much um, the main chunk of my lockdown experience. And it's only maybe my third week back in, and hence, before we started recording, I was saying that I am easing my way in, conscious of not kind of trapping myself back into the little hamster wheel that we can all identify with, and just really checking back in with my every step. Yeah.
That is a fascinating stuff. And what I find more interesting is that people from different walks of life that I've spoken to
Mm.
remark on a very similar thing. This idea of it's kind of like when you're in a car and you're going down the motorway at 85 and then you
Yeah.
slow down to 30 and you're like, this is so slow. But
Mm.
relative to walking, for instance, it's still pretty quick.
hmm
And I feel like that lockdown was us slowing down. And at first we were like, whoa. Like you said, every day you're like, oh my God, what do I do all day?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then I think, you realize actually this is good. And I was saying to people, this is the cheapest silent retreat you'll ever go on. Like for me, because I live alone, and
yeah.
I'm pretty
Oh,
gregarious,
that's
pretty
for you.
social. But
Yeah.
I was like, I really got into it. I was like, I
Mm.
like this quiet time. Like you
Mm.
said, things start coming up. And I think without knowing, we are people that will jump from distraction to distraction to distraction for
Mhm.
fear of thinking.
Mm.
We're scared of what's down there, what's going to come up. And we're very good at painting over the top. To make matters worse, I think society has very much made us, not emulate is the wrong word I'm thinking of, but to prop up this idea of being productive all the time is a very good thing.
Yeah.
So then we grab onto that and go, well, I'm doing a good thing. So if I'm doing a good thing, it can't be bad.
Mhm.
But you can even make a good thing bad, depending on how you use it. Anything can be a poison or a potion, depending on how we
Mhm.
use it. And I think for me, certainly, I was like, oh, I've been busying myself for maybe some of the wrong reasons. So yeah, it's interesting to see that you come up with that. The journaling, I want to hear more about because it's something I've wanted to do.
Mm.
Do you? I mean, is that something you've learned before, or you simply just put pen to paper?
Um, I guess I've tried different ways of journaling, all from an intuitive place. So like not necessarily going through like I mean I have read uh books or articles about prompts and journalings, and I have attended sessions held by friends, and just there are different approaches to it. But I think the root of it is that it always stems from what spills out from my hands, and I think with us being freelancers and just with this age, we're just constantly on screen, and journaling has helped me come back to what I loved so much as a kid, which is doodling. So yeah, I just really find that being such a grounding practice. And firstly, practicing gratitude, in just every day putting something on a paper. And I've bought a book that it's not with me at the moment, but it's a really small book, probably like A6 size, and that is just to keep myself away from my perfectionist self as well. Because even in journaling, one of the biggest blocks that I experience is that I guess as a kid when I was growing up, I get caned in writing. So that has kind of constructed a mechanism in me to only be able to write beautifully, like in the way that I write. And if anything doesn't look beautiful, then it's just going to be like, oh, okay, I need to erase it, I need to change it, and all of that. So then by committing to, say, writing to pen and committing to writing to a specific like size of a space, it's really helped me get rid of this perfectionist self and just see what spills out. And I've even tried journaling in a sense of audio recording, because again, there's no filter in, you just speak your mind out instead of, oh, I'm thinking of this, so I'm going to write this out, which is, a stage to go through. So yeah, I'd say even right now, I'm just continuously experimenting with different modes of journaling. But at the moment, it is this, tiny journal that I go back to every day at the end of the day, and I see what comes up. It could be just one thing, or it could be what I do. It could be lyrics of a song, could be something that my friend has shared in words. So whatever I take onto, I just kind of relive it through this process of journaling. And I think that's from, I don't know if you know Sean Akers' work, but
Mm.
he is a huge speaker on happiness. And he was saying, he's trying to find ways, obviously, to get everyone to access happiness and joy. And the one the way we can do this in the most accessible manner is to think about a practice that is as similar as brushing your teeth, right? That's probably the one thing that every single person would do, because once you complicate a process, then it becomes a bit of a, oh, I can't do that, I don't have the luxury of time or money to do that. So then what he said was, the simple practice of just calling out your gratitude, as simple as dinner time is going, I'm grateful for this. And by simply expressing your gratitude, you are reliving the positive experience that you've had, which in your mind you actually can't differentiate. So you're reliving it twice. And so hope, by this practice of journaling, I'm hoping to double my positive experience in that sense, so that I go to sleep in a much more grounded and blissful state.
Mm.
So yeah, that's journaling for me so far.
It just sounds fascinating. It's funny how you use the analogy of brushing your teeth. I, I
Mm,
feel like the same way, and I think I've realized this change in language is that
mm-hmm.
we spoke about mental illness for a long time.
Yeah.
Now we start to speak about mental health, and I think that slight change is important. And
Yes.
I'll tell you why. When we talk about brushing our teeth, we talk about dental hygiene.
Yeah.
We don't talk about dental pathology. You don't
Yeah.
brush your teeth when they start falling out. You brush them to prevent them falling out. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the way we thought about looking after our brains, including things like being happy, is that we wait till we're really sad to try fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot to be said for that, but there's also a lot to be said for what are the things we can do every day to help us fight that when it does come, to kind of fortify us
Absolutely.
so that when the hard times come, we've got a little more going on. Because it's hard to, as you know, I'm sure everyone knows, when you're sad, you're not very motivated. So to try start a new habit when you're sad is so
mm,
tricky. I've done it through breakups of trying to get into the gym, and you're just
mm,
like, what's the point? You know,
mm,
whereas if you've instilled this already, like you said about brushing your teeth, it's a
mm.
non-negotiable. You don't go, I'm sad today, so I'm not brushing my teeth. It's like, well, you idiot, brush your teeth anyway. Like
Mm,
that's unrelated. So I
mm,
would love to see this shift happen more and more often. I also love your concept of living things twice. You know, I sometimes use the
mm.
analogy of joy in the world is kind of like oranges. Like
Yeah.
to get the juice from the orange, you got to do a little bit of work, you know?
Mm,
And in the 70s, you have to do all the work. You know, you had to like squeeze them on those like tiny little
mm,
triangles. Now we got juices and stuff like that. And the idea is maybe to get your brain to work more like a juicer than like by hand squeezing it. And you
mm.
find these little techniques. And I think what your man's saying, who is the guy you referenced?
Sean Aker.
Sean Eck, it sounds like what he's trying to do is find those processes to help us extract joy
Absolutely.
because it's there. You know, we have these pathways. And I like the way he says access, because certainly the way I understand it through yoga is that we have access to all the emotions because they reside here. We think
Mm,
that external things cause them, but it's still
mm,
happening in here, you
mm.
know? So
Yeah,
this,
I find that this is just so important because it's been highlighted not just recently, but this whole time that sometimes in within the industry of wellness, it really is seen as a luxury, and people feel like, oh gosh, like I don't have the money for this, like, oh, this is only for people who have the means. Like, what about me? What do I do? And like, I'm more and more super wary of the fact of how we could serve the underprivileged, and these practices are the most accessible manner into doing that. You don't have to fly away, or you don't have to do all these big things. And that's probably my biggest discovery from switching off, because all of a sudden, from just cutting myself off any sort of outside services, and going back to the simplicity of, as I've said, walking in the park, reading a book, playing the piano, just daily, like, simple stuff, I found so much more joy than I would have actually had when I was freely able to roam outside. And it's not that I don't miss social contact at all. I really do miss it. But there's something about being so in tune with the simplicity of every day, that you then realize that actually it's not that far-fetched of a concept to be able to attain this idea of contentment, happiness, and joy, if you open yourself up to being really present with what is immediately around you. So yeah.
no, this is great stuff, you know, and
Mm,
I think you're right. I think this moment in time,
mm,
you know, it's hard for me to know because I haven't found many people. I found a few friends that have struggled with it, but for a large part, people have quite enjoyed it, you know.
mm.
And I don't know about everyone else, but I imagine some people going like, not working is not the worst thing, like, which is terrible, right? Because you're like, it does make you realize, are you working in a vocation or are you working a job? You know,
Mm,
and my discrepancy between the two is that a vocation is something you do because you want to do it, and a
mm.
job is something they have to pay you, otherwise you would leave. Like that's the deal, right? They're like, here's some money because I know you'd prefer to do something else.
Yeah.
And I think it's really scary maybe for some people to think, you know, I've enjoyed time with the family and being home, and like this idea of going back to work, I don't know, you know, but it's certainly finding joy in the simple things is definitely one way to soften the blow of the world. But also, like you said, there's a lot of joy in these things. And it's funny, this technology addiction ends up being just that, right? We should be happy as anything that we have this thing in our pocket that
Mm,
has access to all the information in the world. Like that's boom, every film you could ever want to watch, you can watch.
mm.
You don't even have to wait. And
Yeah.
somehow that doesn't make it's a very surface level happiness, you know. I think
I
back.
guess that's kind of back to what you said about the juicing of oranges, right? There's a process to it. You got to work
Mm,
before that joy, or whatever it is, that is the kind of the positive experience. And by technology, sometimes, like, I am so thankful for technology, because if not for it, we can't even connect like this.
yeah.
You know, I can't. I wouldn't be able to reach my students and still share my how I could support them through movement. But there's also an element of that that has taken away the aspect of waiting and working. So I think there's that expectation in our heads that everything comes immediately, instant gratification, and with that we take away the most important part of anything, which is process. It's not about the product in the end. It's really about the process. And when we allow ourselves to embody this journey of um, things transforming gradually, or letting things come into fruition in a very organic manner, um, that's when we can really build that presence, I feel, and that appreciation for
Mm.
things.
Yeah, it's so funny because you see kids get this wrong all the time, where they want the end result. A silly example, but in Call of Duty, like a video game, there's some cheats where you
Yeah.
can, the computer can play for you.
Mm.
And then of course it feels good because you're number one, but you didn't do anything. So it's this weird thing of like, well, what is the point then? What exactly are we doing? And I think it's hard for us to sometimes realize that the process, and I've been finding a lot of solace in reading the Bhagavad Gita during this time, which says,
Mm.
you have the right to work, but not the right to the fruits of your labor. You should enjoy doing the thing. It's not about getting the thing.
Mm.
If you enjoy doing the thing, then you tend to get the enjoyment twice again, because you get to enjoy doing it, and any results that come, but it's not transfixed on that thing. It's the process of going through it and going, wow. Yoga, for the best part, I think, is that patience practice. And for me, not being a very patient person has forced me to be patient, because you show up and you do the thing, and things take a while. And usually the longer things take, the more you enjoy the result, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever it is, like,
Yeah.
because whether it's a handstand or playing the guitar, when you can finally do it, when you hear the note or you hold the pose, it's now suddenly, it's not just the pose or the note,
Mm.
it is the culmination of all your hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it represents. So when you see it, you're like, oh my goodness, I never used to be able to do this, and now I can. I think it shows us what we're capable of, and how we have this process of being able to change. uh,
100%.
Dev, I wanted to talk a little bit. This is something I don't know, and just for my
Mm.
own interest, how is it that you got in to yoga and movement? I mean, people that don't know you uh, will maybe think that you're a yoga teacher, a standard yoga teacher, which couldn't be further from the truth. If you've not been to David Camp's class, you're in for a treat. He really mixes a fusion of things. Can you explain a little bit about your movement history?
Yeah, sure. I think my well, I'm movement was the last thing I think about as a child, because I think I grew up being someone really shy, and having been plopped into uh, athletics in school, it gave me a conclusion that, okay, I'm not made for anything movement related, because I just suck at sports. And so that just was something I cut myself off from, until I was cheekily kind of brought into it through a practice called Chinese drums. And it's kind of, when you see in Asian culture lion dances,
Yeah.
so sort of like that. And so it was because I'm quite a passionate musician, not, nothing too professional, but, it's something I've loved as a child. And drumming was like, okay, I could relate to that because it's rhythmic, right? And then I realized that it was quite athletic, because you would be jumping and swiveling around the drums, you would be carrying the drums, all of that. So that was what started it. And I would say it had a bit of an influence of martial arts training, kind of.
Mhm.
And I did that for about 10 years as a kid, till I graduated. And that kind of uh, exposed me, as a part of our training, into dance. And dance was then something that I really was drawn towards. And I didn't really understand what it was before, but I guess it was a way of me coping with expression, because again, I'm not the most articulate person. I can't quite process my emotion as a child. So movement allowed me to access that without the competitive spirit that you see within sports. It feels like something a bit more reflexive. I kind of move based on my understanding of my body. So then I went on training, professional training. This is after graduating from university. I decided to take the leap. I graduated from an architecture degree, and throughout the whole time, I couldn't help but continue dancing. So then I took the leap to do a master's in dance performance. That is how I got into London, and that's with Trinity Lab and Conservatoire. And with them, I've been touring for a while, just kind of, I guess, sharing works with by a few choreographers. And across the whole time, I kind of sandwiched my yoga training in between. And it was actually just kind of, oh, I will, offer this to the company of dancers just as a way for us to keep fit and healthy. It really was just that. And then beyond that, I guess I continued teaching, and it organically developed into um, what I do now. In yoga, I started with rocket yoga, which I'm really grateful for, because I think the very essence of rocket yoga was about play. And so I guess I took that spirit and really ran with it. And my first teacher was Jamie Blowers. He's based in Leeds, incredible teacher. And I feel like he has given me such a rock solid foundation in the technical side of yoga that then allowed me the courage to just completely break the rules and fiddle with it. And more beyond that, I've been looking into elements of Fighting Monkey and works of Thomas Laugh English, and they do a lot more just pure movement based stuff without labelings. So it's not yoga, it's not dance, it's not anything, it's movement. I'm looking at the body, and I'll see where I go with that. And currently I'm doing a course that is back in my school, Laban, and it's called Chronological Studies, and that is basically the study of movement. That is a bit of a tricky one to explain, but in short, it's kind of to really look into how we can understand movement, because a lot of the courses we see out there is still based on form or shape, or looking at body as a body. But can we look at movement itself? So not only just the human body, it could be movement of objects or whatever, but we're looking at movement. So that is, whilst interesting, it's a bit mind-boggling. So that's what I'm, working away at for the next 2-3 years, and hopefully by then I get to share a little bit of what I've learned.
Wow. So is that a graduate kind of, that's a
It is a specialist diploma, so I think they're reviewing it to be able to become a PhD or maybe a master's, which is kind of my intention. I'd love to, work on a PhD out of what I've learned, and I told them that although they don't offer that option, I'd love to already undertake this as a PhD endeavor, just so I keep myself accountable for the rigor of how I would approach the material of these learnings, because it is pretty mind-blowing.
So it sounds like, and please adjust me as need be, but it sounds like it's almost a study of physics. Is that fair to say? If you're saying movement through bodies and everything, are you talking about
Yes.
forces and shapes and angles?
In some ways, yeah, but I would say physics is only a strand of it. We go by 5 strands, and that would be action, body, rhythm, relationship, and dynamics.
Oh.
And so, yeah, it's really interesting, because then you talk about, and this is actually something that is covered within the industry of performance as a whole. So actors, they've learned this, but I'm kind of going into a much deeper detail into it. And it would be, the crudest example is, say, the way you move your arm. And I know, obviously this is a podcast, but just for your understanding, I could, the way I sit down, that's naturally an acceleration because I'm reacting to gravity. If you were to just decelerate the way you sit down, it would suggest a completely different thing. It's as if you're trying to sit down on a sharp surface. Does that make sense? If I were to slow down my descent towards the seat. So we're looking into that kind of detail. Or if I were to dissect things like Kapalapati, right? The way you breathe in yoga, and that is kind of a sharp breath in towards the spine. That is kind of acceleration in a way. It's an impactful force instead of something that's a little bit more like a sigh, which is a different quality, or a gasp, which is again a different breathing quality. So it's exactly that, without kind of, I guess, what they always say is that they're trying to create a way to be able to articulate and notate movement as clearly as music. Because you see, you have music that has crescendo and minim and crotchet, all of that. But there's nothing in movement. When you look at a dance piece, we still kind of go, oh, that looks visceral, or that looks great. That's very visual. But you're not actually talking about the movement necessarily. And so this is an attempt in doing that.
Now, I'm so glad you brought that up, because one of the first conversations we had is something I want to come back to, and it was the first time I'd heard of a notation of movement.
Yeah.
Which I found fascinating. And as you're saying this, and you were saying it's a bit hard to explain, I'm reminded how language is the transference of ideas, and if we lack the ability to do that, the knowledge gets stunted too. So if I can't explain my ideas to you, you can't build on it. You can't critique it. It's very hard for us to then build up. And that's the beauty of language. And when we look at the progress of Homo deus, or humans, it's because they can converse and put together abstract ideas. And that's how we can send people to the moon, which is still incredible, and we did it handwritten. So this is very interesting. But you spoke to me the first time, and I always say it wrong. It's something the notation is something like lambdata, lambria.
Data notation.
So close. So close. So is this an extension of that? And can you explain a little bit about that? Because I found it so fascinating when you said that. You can explain as much as you can with your voice, but this video will be going on YouTube too, so people can see. So if you want to gesticulate with your arms,
yeah,
handy.
of course. Well, historically, I think it stemmed from like within the dance industry, we were trying to look at how we can recreate a piece of dance, right? Because if this group of dancers have dances, well, a classic work that's from 1970s, and pretty much all of the dancers are, either retired or not traceable. So then how would I then go back into recreating that piece? So like music, right? They do that by creating a score, like these music notes. And that's kind of why it came about. Like when I talked about what came about, what I mean is a score for movement, for dance. And that's one small aspect in this huge area that we call chronological studies. So Laba notation simply being the technical form of notating movement. And personally, within our industry, I wouldn't say that it's the most relevant, just because firstly, it is very heady, and like it will take years to sort of kind of get into like the nitty-gritty of this. But what I'm really fascinated about with this is that it is another mode of language, and like you said, language is a means of simply transposing what the indescribable things are. And I really believe in the fact that no one language can represent everything. And this is fundamentally why I got into movement, because I don't like what I feel I cannot express through words. That's why movement is there. And what I cannot express through movement, I express through words. And now by opening myself up to this third like language of understanding movement is giving me basically more tools to then kind of allow a much more rounded understanding and conveyance of what I'd like to share. So if I were to go back towards these scores, elements of what would be included would be things like firstly actions, right? So when I say actions, we go by something that is a lot more generic or open-ended, maybe. So I don't know if you're aware of the term fractals. Fractals are basically patterns that recur in the universe. So a great example is a spiral.
Mhm.
It's within our DNA, is within the nature of our movement. Same thing with snowflakes, right? So those kind of patterns. So when I say action, it would be things like that, where it would be maybe a turn, a gesture, um, uh, travel, which could be walking, running, it could be weight transfer. So it is as open as that. And all of these actions will have a bit of a symbol that is associated to it. So then you write a vertical score of the sequence of these actions. So when a dancer or when a mover reads it, they actually could end up moving in completely different forms, but you would see the same
Mhm.
pattern of now they're turning in their own way before maybe one decides to walk and one decides to run, before a bit of a weight transfer. And then layered on top of these actions could then be effort, like I'm going to extend my arm in a sharp manner, or maybe in a sustained, soft and slow manner, or maybe in an aimless manner. Like there are many kind of factors that could be notated. And then obviously we talk about degrees of becoming. So like I said, these things, whilst we can write them, they're so subjective.
Mm.
And because we're constantly in transformation, so then we could also then notate how from starting really strongly in your movement, you can then gradually become light, or you can then become heavy. And what would that mean? And yeah, so I hope that's kind of,
I'll
as
tell you
best as
what.
I could.
Look, it totally makes sense to me. But I tell
Mm,
you what I find interesting is that if the idea was to transpose it in the same way music has,
mm,
someone could read the same piece of music and play it exactly the same.
yeah.
There's an accurate depiction. Interesting. This sounds like there's a depiction, but I think there's something beautiful about the fact that it can be interpreted different ways,
Absolutely.
which keeps the art form. So you show this thing, and it would be a beautiful thing to see several dancers reading the same thing. And coming back to what you were saying about
Mm,
this, I forget what you said, monkey movement or something,
like a monkey.
fighting monkey.
Yeah.
This idea of not putting labels on things.
Mm,
Go, here's a movement style. Here's a way to. Here's a movement.
mm,
How would you do it? And it allows people to then put their accent onto it, or their own personal limbs. Like you said, yoga, may be guilty for this. Or maybe not yoga, but certainly yoga teachers currently for focusing on the shape.
mm,
The shape must look like this, which is a crazy thought if we think about how limbs, me and you are totally different shapes,
mm,
right? In terms of height, length of limb, ratio of limb, probably more importantly, and strength in different areas. So to think that we would hold a pose in the exact same angle would be unusual.
mhm,
Some might say impossible. So if we focus more on the feel or
mm,
the movement, like you said, of the intention of what we're doing, that makes far more sense. Your legs don't have to be in the splits, but think about that hip coming back and this hip pushing forward.
mhm,
Now there's a understanding, but maybe this is going to deepen then our ability to explain ourselves, something
mm,
like this.
mm. And I think that's, as you said, the absolute beauty of it, where more and more it's such a reinforcement that the nature of movement needs to come from a place of liberation, because only you hold your truth to your experience of your body. And however knowledgeable I am as a teacher, I cannot discredit what you feel, and I cannot assume what you feel. I could say what I feel and share that and see if you could relate to it, but that really is all. And when we end up especially to teachers who may be hearing this, when we end up being too focused on the form of it, it is the most kind of fundamental way of oppressing yeah, oppressing people towards behaving a certain way, when, you know, really a big part of yoga is to liberate, to let them realize the possibilities in their body. So whilst discipline is a great aspect of it, and whilst having these shapes are a good point of departure, they are only that. And they are not, I really wouldn't say that they are things that we strive towards necessarily. They're simply a blueprint, because again, we don't stay still, right? When we, like in life, we walk all the time. We're constantly in this place of transformation. And how do we do that? We do that through movement. And so these little shapes are screenshots of a millisecond of things. So this is why I think personally in my practice, I'm really focused on the transitioning. And you know, I may have started out so passionate about, say, the choreography of flows, and then I realized actually that's kind of feeding my ego too, you know, just getting people to move like me. So what about if it becomes so open-ended where you could kind of tailor how you do it? And um, this is when I find postures, asana, being very useful, because it's something that people can immediately kind of grasp. So then by that, I could call these postures out for them to then know where we're roughly going before they then venture off in their own little practice again. So
So for you, it's almost about, and this reminds me of being in your class, it's almost like giving people checkpoints and saying, hey guys, we'll reconvene here.
exactly.
Feel free, go the way you want to go, and
Mm,
we'll meet back here, and then we'll decide where we want to go from here,
mm,
without telling them this is where you need to move your feet. Which I will say speaks probably more to an advanced, not practitioner of yoga, but someone who a more advanced person that understands their body. I'm not really explaining myself well, just because I think a lot of probably confidence more than
mm,
experience, you know,
yeah.
because that's the big part. I think the structure of yoga, or giving people the exact thing to do, for people that aren't confident with their body, that feels safe. If you tell me what to do, all right, this isn't on me, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas there's a confidence to go and you saying move how you want, and someone going like, I don't want anyone to look at me, because that's
Mm,
a big part, right? If people come to classes and they're like, you know, how many people come to your class, not your class particularly, but any class, where they go, I just want to go to the back. You know, everyone wants to be at the back because they're like, no
yeah.
one look at me. Don't look at me. You know, there's this weird shame to
Yeah.
the movement not perfect, you know, which
See,
maybe
this is
speaks
what
back
I
to your
find
point.
really, yeah, I don't know. I find this really fascinating, because that was genuinely my kind of like um what I was wary about. But then I realized that actually the people, the newer a practitioner is in the room, the more they respond to that approach of teaching,
Mm,
because they come in with no
no
expectation.
expectations.
They
Yeah.
have no, like, what are you talking about? What is Warrior 2? What is Warrior 3? So then they were truly listening to the possibilities of what's there.
Mm,
Whereas, you know, people who, I think that's the funny thing, because I feel like my practice um, seems particularly effective to people who are new, as well as people who have practiced for a long time, because I guess they have reached a point where they're like, I'm done with this specific transition. I'm so bored of it. What else can I find through it? You know, and there's that middle ground who, you know, might have just found an enjoyment in a certain pattern of movement and want to repeat that. And I guess then it comes ultimately down to my job as a teacher to tailor to the mind of the room. And you know, like, there is a way to keep the class open whilst still holding them with a little bit more structure, so that it doesn't become come to class and just wiggle. You know, because I've tried that too, and that's my biggest learning curve of offering too much freedom, and
mm.
then people just come out feeling completely aimless and lost, because it's like, oh, you know. So then it's, that is, I think, the job of a teacher, to navigate this fine line of offering just enough structure, so that, again, you know, you want to be I don't know where I've heard this, but you almost want to be a gardener and not an architect, you know, where you're planting these seeds and you're just letting these plants grow in their own way, than to necessarily be an architect where you're calculating every single aspect of things and only are aiming for one specific vision. So that really helped me in terms of reminding why I teach the way I teach.
I really like that. Gardener, not an architect.
Mm,
That's fantastic. That's a very good saying. And it's such a good saying. It threw me off my thought pattern there for a sec. Oh yes,
mm,
back to your point about what we're trying to do and that idea of giving too much freedom. You see, anyone who listens to this regularly or has heard me rattle off about this enough times, like I'm obsessed with order and chaos. Like, and for the longest time, I think even going back to Mesopotamia,
mm,
the two deities that always come up are those two things:
yeah.
order and chaos. And it's
Mhm.
not that one is good and one is bad. It's that we're trying to strike that balance between, when you look at
That's it.
Taoism or Taoism, same thing. There's this order and the chaos, the black and the white, the yin and the yang, the masculine, the feminine,
Yeah.
Mother Nature, Father Time, something regimented, something free. And
Mm,
to get the best out of us, we need the mixture of the two, you know.
mhm,
And it's funny how even political systems, if you take that to the nth degree, you have complete, you know, a dictatorship is full on order where everything is regimented, and that's
mm,
not good for people. On the other side is anarchy, which
mm,
also isn't good for people. So it's funny at a micro level in people's individual life, as you're describing, when they come to your class,
mm,
given too much freedom, it's too much of a free for all. Too much
yeah.
regiment
Mm,
is maybe lacking in creativity. And then
mm,
at a macro level, even politically, we see these two things interplaying all the time. So it
mm,
was fun, interesting to see how it comes up in different places. And certainly your gardening and architecture concept is a really good one.
mm.
So Dave, in terms of your study, is that something you've always wanted to do in terms of stimulating the brain as well as the body through movement?
No, I think it found me. Like I said, the way I was introduced to movement was such an ambush. It was the last thing on my mind. The only thing I know is that I am a creative. That's the one thing I can really identify with since I was a kid. That um, my pursuits are always from the roots of like curiosity. And this is what I uh, kind of continue going back to um, in whatever I do. So this current course that I'm doing is really that. Um, it like even now I have to confess that it is quite overwhelming. It's like a really sort of incredible framework on its own, and with that, I still don't really know how I would be able to translate this into the work that I currently offer. But I'm going to this with trust that I'm magnetized towards it at the moment. And same thing, I think one of the quotes that I always share podcast class, like everywhere, is that the creative poverty of not yet knowing is an invitation to play. I'm going to say that again. The creative poverty of not yet knowing is an invitation to play. And so whatever it is that I choose to pursue or learn starts from that. Where is my blind spot? What do I not know yet? And then through that, I then kind of look at the people who I am drawn to. And sometimes, I might discover a teacher who I'm just like, gosh, like your stuff is so foreign to my world, but I'm just gonna join because there's something about you that I feel I could learn from. And it's less about the content because, ultimately there's so many courses in the world. You can kind of pursue knowledge, like those objective knowledge in your own time, but it's the vibe of the person and the wisdom that they have in their lived body that I'm so interested in. And when I say not knowing, I know, there's so many things that we don't know, but like what I mean is really almost the opposite end of your blind spot. Like I guess the clearest example in my context is how, my practice, my classes are very people always associate it to dance, right? To creative movement. So a lot of people would be like, you would be so great learning with Shiva Ray. And, in my head, I was just like, actually, I kind of don't want to, because I feel like, what we do are quite similar. So I'm already naturally on my own trajectory, but maybe something like restorative yoga would be a complete blind spot for me, or this course that I'm doing, which I still don't know how to assimilate, is a complete blind spot, so that it really hits a part in my brain that's so dormant that I didn't have to consider it.
It's this idea of exciting a different part of your brain, right? So
100%.
in Sapiens, I think Yuval Harari explains how he uses the example of Homer Simpson in the White House. He says how for most people, you've never thought of those two things together. Literally what happens in your brain, two things ignite. One, the part of your brain that remembers Homer Simpson, the other part that knows the White House, whether it's something you've seen as an image or a memory or an abstract thing. And then it connects the two.
Yeah.
In that moment, you've made a connection between two parts of your brain that maybe haven't seen each other before. And they explain how this can also keep you young in terms of your brain, because your brain is constantly having to find new paths. And what you're saying is much the same point. Instead of following that same trajectory, you're going, what's new? What else can I learn? What else can I stay curious about? And
That
curiosity
is the very basis of creativity, right? You connect the dots, you create connections. So just by introducing a stimuli that is so out of your usual kind of radar, you get that collision, and that creates something, again, back to order chaos, right? To very different end of the spectrum, yoking together. The point of yoga again, which is why I always say yoga is fundamentally a creative practice. Because of that, you're creating this connection, mind and body, soul, like all of these different domains, creating portals of connectivity.
Do you think, David, that the trajectory of yoga may be the same way martial arts went, in terms
Mm.
of how Bruce Lee took something that was very traditional,
Mm.
and started inviting people a little bit like you? He didn't say, this is the way you should do it. He just started mixing things up and saying, this is what you should do. Find stuff that works for you and create something beautiful out of it.
Mm. I think it really is. There's already a nice rise of with the rise of trauma informed practices. That's the start of this change, that people are really looking at frameworks of teaching that empowers and that encourages inquiry within students. So there's no longer a you should, but what about? So yes, absolutely. I think it is going towards that, and I'm really grateful for in terms of the wider context with this whole movement on Black Lives Matter. It really is also this, where we're looking at coming back to no longer any oppression, and liberation, and sparking kind of uh, empowerment in people by reminding them that they know it, and they have the power to decide. Because the one key thing about trauma is that I can't articulate this well enough from how I've learned it, but they say that the key to recovery from trauma is the power of choice, where, once someone's given a decision that they can make themselves, that's the first step to recovery, because they know that, oh, I'm no longer in a place where I cannot decide, and I have control, in aspects of my life, to hopefully one day have a say in all aspects of my life. I
So
say definitely that trajectory.
it's about finding that autonomy, that agency for
Mm.
ourselves. And yeah, I guess what you're saying is that trauma has the reins, and
Mm.
until such time as you can take the reins away from the trauma, that the trauma isn't making decisions for you, or at
Mm.
least affecting your decisions. But I
Yeah.
agree totally with you. I think in yoga we should be asking a lot of questions as opposed to telling. Like,
Mm.
I had this discussion with a friend of mine the other day, if in a class political views should be shared in a class, or I guess my point was, is that the place for it, or should that not be the place where we allow people to decide
Mm.
for themselves by them looking into themselves, which is something I feel more strongly about, because they didn't come there to hear what I think.
Yeah.
We went to a class once at a very popular studio in London, and I brought a friend of mine for the first yoga class ever, and we're the only two guys in there.
Yeah.
Already a little bit unsettling for him, I can imagine. And the woman opened with, well, there's an anti-Trump protest tomorrow, and before we start, I want to hear from the two guys why they think it's okay for guys to treat women like that. And I just thought, what is, like, you're enforcing this idea, firstly, that what if he is a Trump supporter? Like, now you've
Yeah.
told him he's not welcome here because
Mm.
you've decided that's the only truth.
Yeah.
The only truth that's possible is the one that you have,
Exactly.
And so, yeah, even with this new world that we're in, I'm certainly of that opinion now, that I kind of, and I've always thought this, the individual, I think, is very important, because I think in the individual, and it sounds like you're alluding to the same thing, inside of them, asking the right questions, they're going to come up with an answer that works, and it's probably good for them, and it's probably good for everyone else. If people can just think a little bit about what they do, and that they're acting compassion and with love, we'll probably come to very similar answers.
Mm.
But that's not for me to decide. Again, back to the point about the playing the video game. If you can win, if I can get you to think what I think without going through the process,
Yeah.
it's probably, yes, less useful than you going through the process, or me
Yeah.
going through. To assume that I have done all the work is also presumptuous.
Yeah, it's back to, like teaching people how to fish than to give them the fish now.
Hmm.
It's that analogy. And I feel, yeah, I really want to echo what you said about a teacher holding space and not injecting any views. And that is essentially an attack, right? And what how would you have said that would have been a safe space for the two uh, male students who come in and just gotten this um, welcome
Yeah, it's
or
an altercation
unwelcome.
immediately. You're like, oh,
Absolutely.
I'm on the
Yeah.
other side, am I?
Yeah. And there is a way, I mean, it is a good, I guess, a good matter to talk about as well, because I feel, obviously, again, with Black Lives Matter, there's a rise in activism.
Hmm.
As a yogi, like, to be practicing is to also be aware of what's happening around you and to be mindful of that. But it is very different to hold space within teaching a class and encouraging people to find their own journeys towards activism than to kind of potentially shame them for, why are you not acting now? Why are you not acting the way I'm acting right now? Because we are all, we all have our own rhythms. And even in lockdown, that's so clear. Look at the myriad of possibilities that people have, like, gone towards doing. Like you said, you jumped into productivity, which is not wrong at all. I went straight into my little hermit shell, which is not wrong at all. It's just our means of doing things. We all need our own time and space to process the way that we can. And so I think it's so imperative for teachers to be mindful of that, and to
Hmm.
never impose, and to to never shame. And I think it's not something that's done with that intention,
Hmm.
but it's really something to consider. Like, have you been kind of subconsciously sort of shaming someone without knowing? Because if they start from there, how are they even going to begin to find that place of liberation?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's come back to we're talking about making shapes.
Yeah.
Instead of, and I think it was Adam Hustler that said this to me in terms of teaching tips. It was something along the lines of asking questions as opposed to telling. And it comes back to what we were just saying politically, but in terms of the shape, can you go deeper is very different to go deeper. Like, you don't know, maybe they hit their deepest mark the minute they stepped into that pose.
Yeah.
So giving them that instruction is maybe not the right one. Asking the question, can you go deeper? Can you draw your hip under more? Now, these are questions, open-ended. It also allows you to then become part of the process.
Yeah.
I'm not just doing what the teacher says, but I'm going, I have to ask myself, okay, that means I have to reconnect to my body and go to that place and go, all right, how does that feel? Maybe there is space. Actually, let me try. As
Mhm.
opposed to, well, he did say, so now I will do,
Mm,
so it's, again, we see these macro and micro level of ideas coming through. So
mm,
yeah, very interesting time to certainly be around. Dave, I
mm,
also want to ask you now, in terms of your practice, how
mm.
is it that you practice? Is there someone in particular, certain teachers you like to practice with? Do you do your own thing? Do you do different types of training, or is it mainly yoga?
I really believe in training uh, in through multiple means, because again, back to the whole blind spot concept. And especially as a dancer coming into um, now predominantly offering movement in the language of yoga, I found myself losing my dynamics, and I've gotten all zen and gooey,
Mm,
and slow and calm in my movement. So then one day I was just like, gosh, like I can't do explosive jumps anymore. I probably can't turn as quickly as I used to. Where has that gone? I forget, because what you don't use, you just lose.
mm.
So I I have to say, lately I've been a massive fan of boot camps.
Oh, yes,
Because
Dave.
again, it's so opposing of my
Mhm.
nature. And I remember when I did it in the beginning, gosh, I was like, I was generally like, I would say I was quite fit, but still, it was so far out of my radar. But then, it was the willingness of like, okay, let's go back there. So I do boot camps a lot, because I feel it very it counters very well the nature of how I move now. And beyond that, in truth, I actually have not been doing much yoga practices with other teachers, just because I I think I've been spoiled by
Mhm.
trainings. When you go on to trainings, you practice for like 2 hours or like 3 hours. And so what I find is I cannot quite, this is the funny thing, I cannot quite do the more free form classes with others, because again, I do that myself, so I didn't really find too much need to go to places like that, especially when it's quite short as well. I feel like, I would have just started to go deeper, and then, oh, it's shavasana. But I could do things that are a little bit more physical. So I would do, say, rocket or dharma, or if not restorative, like just a very clear cut
Mm.
here or there, so that it's quite regimented, just to ground my body. Um, and they're always with a mixture of teachers. But the one yoga practice I have been able to commit to is with my teacher, Naomi Absalom. You must know her. And she is actually based in Brighton. She used to teach teachers classes in um, London as well. And she again offers a practice that is a little bit more free form, but has depth within her words and within the pattern of movements that she looks into. So there's rarely any time we would go into an asana really beyond down dog, I guess. But she is a great example, in my opinion, in how she threads that line of structure to freedom. And I see many newcomers going into her classes and still being able to receive, because of how concise she is,
Mm.
and without going towards a place of fluffiness as well, which I'm very conscious of. Sometimes you can go so um, uh,
Abstract.
abstract in your language that
Yeah.
you lose people. Like, do you really need to pile on 15 descriptive words in one in one set of movements?
Mm.
So she does it really well. And I would say, to teachers listening, definitely check her out. She may not be a cup of tea at all, and she's very unapologetic about it, but
Say
there's
her
something.
name again. Naomi
Naomi Absalom.
Absalon.
Yeah,
And
Absalom, Absalom. And she offers classes at the moment through Zoom on Saturday mornings, which I try to attend. Like, I have trouble with committing, like, because I love breaking my patterns, as
yeah,
you would have
same as
understood
me.
by now. Yeah, and she is the one person. If it's someone I commit to, she's actually the one person I've been able to commit to the most.
Mm.
I still don't go to her classes frequently enough,
Mm.
but she's the one that I most repeatedly go back to.
Okay. And Dave, what about your classes? Are you offering anything online at the moment that people could catch you in?
Yeah, I am sharing weekly classes on Thursday evenings. So tonight, Thursday evenings and Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. British time. And I'm actually thinking of probably continuing this till for as long as I want to teach, because now having explained the nature of how I teach, there's something about doing this within a virtual space that really allows people to lose any sense of self-consciousness.
Mhm.
Because in my classes, I've always said, please do not have any pressure to switch on your screens. Like, I understand, like, I think teachers can really ride off someone's energy if they can see that person and offer corrections. But in my case, because I mainly focus on the idea of freedom, I just want them to make sure they feel safe. And so, usually 50% of my students would be off screen, and they would feedback saying I could breathe better, I could sigh as loud as I want, and I could wiggle without feeling like I need to look like someone else. So that's the space that I'm hoping to provide. So probably going to keep this going until in my own kind of comfort, I feel I probably will only offer classes in person when we have an actual cure. So at the moment, I'm probably not returning to studio classes anytime soon, and I will keep exploring this idea of virtual spaces and maintaining safety yet freedom within that space.
All right, fantastic. Well, Dave, I'm conscious of your time and my own, because I've got a private in a second with handstands. So I have to make sure I can do them first. Uh, but Dave, thank you so much for checking in. Dave, just to finish off, can you just say where people can catch you? What's the easiest thing to find your classes and or follow you?
I think the most convenient one, easiest to remember, is just look for me on Instagram, because through that you can get direct link to my website and classes as well. And you can find me at David Kam KW. So I'll repeat that, David Kam KW. That is David KAM, so M for mother, KW. I'll probably see you there. Ask me any questions you need through that means as well, and I'm happy to answer anything from this podcast or anything in general.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for opening up my eyes to blind spots I didn't even know I had. I was so blind, I didn't know I was blind to them. So thank you very much. And thanks for joining me on Getting Down with Doug.